All right, Diane. In the interest of time, we've got about 58 people aboard. I think most everybody should be connected. We may see some others traipse in, but the recording started, and I think we have everybody aboard, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody, and glad you're here. Welcome to our first webinar in our series on societal benefits for the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, or NAWMP work. My name is Diane Eggeman, and I work for Ducks Unlimited as the NAWMP Integration Coordinator and lead the Integration Steering Committee. This series was developed and sponsored by the Integration Steering Committee and was actually put together by a small group led by Dana Varner and includes Rick Clausen, Dean Smith, and me, and supported by DJ Case and Associates. So thanks to those folks. This effort's in action to implement the 2018 NAWMP update. Specifically, the update's recommendation to help people understand how society benefits from waterfowl habitat. So by way of the webinar series, we wanted to share experiences from folks who are actually engaged in wetland conservation work and have been able to obtain and use information on societal benefits. So I'm going to kick it back to Rick now for some tech talk about today's webinar, and then I'll come back and introduce today's speaker.
Great, thanks, Diane. Again, Rick Clausen with DJ Case and Associates, happy to support today's webinar and support the platform. Hopefully, after 6 or 7 months now of pandemic, folks are pretty comfortable in the online world, but we are recording today's webinar. It'll be posted on later on the nawmp.org website, same place where we've been promoting the websites and we're promoting the webinars, and where you can also register for future ones as well. Just a reminder that coming aboard a webinar that everybody's muted and video is off unless you're a panelist or presenter, but we would invite you to participate along the way, and we'd invite you to do so through the Q&A button that's on the bottom of your toolbar there. Feel free to submit questions as they come up, and then we'll have an opportunity to cover those at the end. If for whatever reason there are any serious tech concerns, feel free to send a chat to me on the side, but otherwise we'll be primarily monitoring the Q&A window to log questions and then respond to them later at the end of Mike's presentation. Diane?
So it's my pleasure today to introduce the speaker, Mike Carter. Mike's the coordinator of the Playa Lakes Joint Venture, and he's been with that joint venture since 2001. He's got extensive education and experience in bird conservation, while at the same time understanding and conserving human cultures of the places where he works. To that joint venture, he brought work experience in the Peace Corps in Liberia, as well as founding and directing the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. At the Playa Lakes Joint Venture, Mike used this experience to build effective and broad community partnerships in that joint venture with businesses, ranchers and farmers, media, and others. You'll see that the story is inspiring. With that introduction, I thank you all for being part of our webinar today, and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Diane. Let me share this real quick.
Got your screen?
Can everybody see that?
Got it.
All right. So in the abstract, I talked about that this was a story because I wanted to relay that everything about this was not really planned, and it's really just our story over the last 20 years of applied conservation. And part of the evolution here and the organic development of this whole program was kind of a transformation from us from using social science to do kind of what's commonly said out there, to understand opinions, change opinions, maybe move people more towards our way of seeing things. And really the evolution for us has been to use social science to find relevance. And that's really, really quite different. It requires us to change, and it requires us to do things differently, but not so much asking other people to change how they view the world. So roughly half of my family is farmers and ranchers. We work a lot in Kansas. My family is from Kansas, but I would never kind of presume to know what ranchers or farmers are thinking. And this joke runs around the PLJV office that whenever we refer to tofu, it kind of reminds us that we may not belong, but that we can still be relevant. So just real quick, 3 or so slides here on the JV. Before I really get into this, there'll be, I hope, a few references to DJ Case. They've been an important part of this work over the years. Also, the Great Plains LCC, while they were up and running, they were a big help and funded a lot of the work. Rainwater Basin Joint Venture and PLJV have been in lockstep on this work. And then really, this presentation and the body of work is by the PLJV staff over the better part of 20 years. And then I have to compliment the management board that also lets us experiment pretty freely with these ideas and these topics, and they've been a great help along the way. So that's the Playa Lakes Joint Venture there. The gray is the Ogallala Aquifer. The blue are playas over the aquifer, and they are geologically connected. It would be really, really hard to do playa conservation without acknowledging the aquifer and those issues. So this whole story is really going way beyond acknowledging it and actually capitalizing on that relationship. We've always had people in our mission statement, but really in the last 10 years it's changed and it's become really much more tangible about that. And this is more on the aquifer. The 80s, post-war, people started pumping the aquifer. This is the world's largest aquifer, and it drives a whole economy in these states. And the red there is, you see it expanding through time. 30 feet where all the red is, that's a really good number, because that's about the level that it's hard to pump the aquifer, and there's not enough water there to pump. I think you can see my cursor here, but I'll be talking about these red areas right here, Clovis in this area and western Kansas in this area. And really, people are scared, they're afraid, and they're worried about their future because of this situation. Real quick on playas, I think everybody in this community knows playas, but there's a couple things in here that are important to the story. They are isolated, they are fed by their own watershed, and because they're fed by their own watershed, the condition of the watershed greatly determines the shape of a playa. And then this is how the recharge works. The basins are clay lined. It can be inches, it can be feet. And the wet-dry cycle of a playa is extremely important, because when you go into a dry cycle, there's huge cracks that appear. Leg size, you know, your whole leg can go in the crack, and the crack goes all the way down below the clay. And once the water is past the root zone, then it becomes recharge water, or it's on its way to the aquifer. That takes somewhere between 10 and 70 years. Once a playa fills up, the clay swells, and then that's when we start referring to the hydro period, or how long the playa holds water. But the recharge also continues along plant roots and over the edges of the playa. It's probably only 5 to 10% of the recharge, but it still happens. The water evaporates, and then the cycle starts again. Really a perfect wetland system, kind of a God-made moist soil unit, if you will. And then just about the recharge through playas is 10 to 1,000 times greater under playas. There's recent information from other parts of the JV where it may be as much as 10,000 or 100,000 times more. And that's becoming very interesting to us, because our estimates are really quite low at this point that we've been using. The other thing that we really emphasize is the water that goes through the playa is of a higher quality because it goes through the clay. So you can strip off a lot of contaminants, herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, things like that that get into the groundwater. And just a little bit about PLJV. We're one of those landscapes that doesn't have many people. There are 8 million people, 9 million people that live in the joint venture. But if you cut out the Denver Front Range, it drops quickly to something below 3 million people. And then if you cut out the other population centers, Amarillo, Lubbock, towns like that, it quickly drops to 1.9 million. So there's way over 100 counties, 170, I believe. But you're looking at a population that is roughly 2,000 people per county. And then those counties are extremely important that people view their county as home. I once went on a tour with my brother-in-law, and when we crossed the county line, he was telling me everything he knew. When we crossed the county line, he says, well, we just crossed the county line, so I really don't know much about this area. And it's roughly 40 miles from his house. That's how they view the world, and that's how the population kind of, you know, what it calls home. And most of these counties have a county seat, maybe 500 people, maybe 1,200 people in the county seat, but the vast majority, it's a very rural landscape, and also a landscape where hunting is very, very much appreciated and still very, very popular. Just not a lot of people do in total doing it. So this is the first foray into social science for the joint venture. Me as a new coordinator, and I was familiar to Playas before I took this job. Actually had worked on them, but we were wondering what farmers and ranchers thought about Playas. So with DJ Case and using our own money, joint venture funding, this is the same funding that we would hire staff with, we did this survey, and that's how important it was to us. It's also a comment on joint ventures used to have a little bit more money to do things like this. But we surveyed 1,800 farmers and ranchers using a very structured format provided by David Case and Associates. And, you know, on the left, we got very typical results, you know, and this varied greatly among the states. The state of Texas was very aware of Playas and the most educated about Playas, and that's where most of the Playas are. A state like Colorado, less so. So it told us where we really needed to do our work. This is one of my favorite things about this survey was at the very, very last moment, we decided to put this question in, and it was basically a checkbox, you know, a list of resources, and then just asking which do you want to see more conservation of. And the only thing that came back as more conservation was the Ogallala aquifer. The two things there were about the same amount of conservation. And I'm sure people have heard this joke or have heard the talk, but there was about 4% support for prairie dogs. So we knew the survey instrument was good because it was very accurate on appreciation for prairie dogs. That set the joint venture to work on communications, and we consider communications a very important part of social science. And you know, whether communications are part of social science or social science informs communications, what you see here is a very, very structured approach to getting the science right, popular literature via flyers, and even hour-long films. We had a radio show at the time where we were really promoting all the messages about Playas, what are Playas, what they do, that they recharge the aquifer, things like that. And all of this was fed in a very dynamic environment of where are we getting responses and where do we feel like we're actually making progress. That eventually spelled the demise of the radio show because we thought farmers and ranchers were listening to the radio, and at least the radio stations that we had, we found that that wasn't really the case. So one of our marquee programs, we ended up bagging because we didn't think that we were getting the reach that we needed. So we did that for about 6 or 7 years, and then again it was time to check in with our audiences, and we did this via focus groups, and this was in collaboration with Rainwater Basin, and again with help from DJ Case. And so 14 focus groups across 6 states with producers asking them questions, and these are the answers that we got back. They don't know if the amount of recharge is significant, but they did say they would help if they were convinced, and they need more information on how long recharge takes, how much, things like that. Another funny thing there is the info must be from a credible source, which I think that was pretty much an indication that the JV might not be viewed as a credible source. We did ask who was a credible source and got a better line on that. The last one there that's underlined, I'm going to take a little detour and just talk about one point that you get from social science. You do a whole survey, you do focus groups, and then you get an answer that just kind of drills on your brain, and you really start thinking about it, and then you really have to do something about it. But the producers were saying, stop telling us what our land was worth and let us tell you what the value of our land is worth. So here's a great example of that. If you look at a playa that's embedded in a field, the crop yield there right on the playa, which the biologists will say, your crop yield is very poor there, therefore you should put this in a program. But they know when they run the combine over that land that the soils surrounding the playas are very, very fertile and very, very productive. So here's an example of how they view the world. And then if you look at that playa, it's in the middle of a field. So that is not a playa that's on the edge. It's not a playa that's in the corner. It's not one that's easy to cut out of the production. So they will say to you, if you want me to cut that playa out of production, you need to pay me more. So a program that's structured that everybody gets $40 per acre, no matter what, just as long as it's a playa, that program will not work. And so what the proof in the pudding here is that Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks worked on playas for the better part of 25 years with standard set of programs, WRE, things like that. And over 25 years, they did 11,000 acres of playa conservation. With this program that we developed with Farm Services Agency called the Migratory Bird Safe, where producers could bid the acres that they wanted to put in and the number of acres that they wanted to put in. So the playa would go in, and then they would decide how much of a buffer to put on it, and then they would offer a bid of what those acres should go in for. An average bid was $167. We believe we can get that down. But if you look at the soil rental rates and even the irrigated rate, they're somewhere in that range between dry land and the irrigated rate. And that's just an awesome result. We're getting ready, we're hopeful that we'll do this program again. And it's really, really funny because we evaluated this program with more social science that I'm not going to really show you today, but it came back, stop making us play the game of doing the reverse auction, just tell us what we can bid. And we took that to mean that they wanted the numbers to be fine-tuned. So we hope that when this program goes out again, that the guidance will be you can offer somewhere between dry land rate and irrigated rate, which really collapses it down and makes it a lot easier for them to decide. So the bottom line on that is one little piece of information from a survey drove a whole program, and that program probably ended up being worth somewhere around 20, 30, $40 million, depending on how many acres and how long it goes. So back to the focus groups. In answering those questions, we used another social science technique, which was a consensus group or a focus group. and brought hydrologists and scientists and even a few communicators, agricultural communicators, about how to refine our messages, and basically locked them in a room for a day and a half. And then the outcome was these 5 messages. And the 5 messages give us a lot of confidence to say things. So they said, you can say number 1 there. They told us number 2, stop saying and stop acting like you're going to save the irrigation-based economy, because you don't sound credible, because you don't recharge at the rate of how fast people are irrigating. And then our recharge is enough to support rain-fed systems, grazing operations, and municipalities. The whole idea of municipalities was new to us. So, you know, that's the rest of the story right there. And then there was a lot of fear that if they conserved water, they conserved aquifer, they lowered use of their wells, that someone else would steal the water. So we're able to say that no, in the aquifer, it flows, but it flows a foot a decade at the most. And so the aquifer, the water you save is yours. The work you do on your playa, the water that recharges under that is yours. And then they really told us to really start improving our messages on improving water quality. So this is, you know, this is the sad part of the story and those maps to us, but really in parts of the joint venture, people are running out of water. And this was a story in National Geographic. And I've actually been in a room where people, disadvantaged folks, are hollering at county commissioners that they're out of water, and they've been trucking water for the last 10 years. And then when we got the message about municipalities, and then we had the information from the hydrologists, that really just gave us a lot of confidence to just march in the door and say, we can help you with this problem. And that's the mayor of Clovis there. These are the kinds of things that he says. Very, very conservative person, but it's just, again, amazing story where we found relevance and we were able to sit down at the same table and get to work. And the same with the producers there. The guy on the left, Vince, he put a playa in a Partners for Fish and Wildlife program 20 or 30 years ago, and he's a smart guy, and he knows, you know, how to benefit his land. But those are his opinions there about, you know, we're going to have to change agriculture to save our towns. And then the other guy there, Blake, talks about managing surface water better. So in Clovis and around Clovis, they manage surface water so that it goes into Playas and increases recharge. We eventually had a management board meeting in the town of Clovis and asked the mayor to come by and talk to us. And yeah, I'm coming up on 20 years with the joint venture, and that's like 40 management board meetings. That was the best 30 minutes of any joint venture meeting when the mayor came and talked to my board about how much Playa Lakes Joint Venture was helping his town. And then he told the stories about aquifers and people, and it was just truly amazing. And so this guy has also been back to DC with, they have a lobbyist that works on water, and actually they went to the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I didn't even know this meeting was going to go on. You know, if they were asking, if we go back, who do we talk to? And so I got all these comments about, wow, that guy from Clovis is really powerful. And I said, where did you meet him? And it was like, well, he was here at the Fish and Wildlife Service office. But that'll come up here in a minute again, when your partners become your advocates. So this is the situation for Clovis. Roughly 4,000 acres of playas are in play. 2,700 of those are pretty functional. We want to get that to 4,000 acres of functional playas. That results in 8% more water for the town. These are all facts that everybody has already seen. Most recently, Cannon Air Force Base wrote a Sentinel Landscape Grant. This is a DoD thing to protect and prepare Air Force Base's installation, this for military readiness. And so water is a threat to that Air Force base. It's a $15 million grant, and they're basically going to implement the Clovis Water Assurance Plan, which has 2 bullets in it about Playas, buying easements on Playas and protecting Playas. So it's gone way beyond PLJV at this point. That's what it looks like. The ones in good condition are light blue, and then just a very typical joint venture approach of what do we need to do with each playa. And right now, through our conservation programs, we're going through getting all the playas that are in grass that have a pit, super efficient for making waterfowl habitat, shorebird habitat. You just basically push the dirt back in the pit, the water spreads over the playa, and we think that that also helps with the recharge. So this is our first experience in involving broad audiences, and in a few slides, this is basically the point of, 5 years ago, we thought this was broad audiences, and it is, but it gets even broader and even more people care when you find relevance. So this is the newest part of the story. If you were at the Future of Waterfowl workshop, this is where I stopped, and it said we have a lot of hope for this. But I think I showed this graphic and just talked about, we were saying, well, how do we target this and how would we go on? And so we just made a graph of towns that are on 30 feet of water, and then large parts of the landscape where there's a lot of playas where we think we could help. So in that quadrant, we identified towns in this area right here. And the really funny thing, sometimes we look sophisticated, but our approach to reaching out to these towns was to send 10 packets to the commissioners and the mayors. And then I followed those up with cold calls. And it was really, really interesting, and it was verging on hilarious, but why are you calling me? And what are we doing here? And just complete misunderstanding. And at the same time, though, we were working with community leaders in some of these towns and saying, who should we talk to? Who's the leader in the community, and who should we get to the meeting? And so in a couple of these towns, Leota and Tribunes, if I go back here, they're right here and right here in Western Kansas. The community leaders said, get these people in the room, and they also said, you probably don't need to get right off the bat the elected officials. In a strange way, they were telling us that the elected officials don't make the decisions. And so we got these folks in the room, the irrigation districts, the conservation district, the Kansas Water Office, Department of Agriculture, Wichita County Commission. And that last line there, I put it that way because I think that's funny, that's the usual group of partners. And NRCS and FSA are, of course, really, really big on that. But we were kind of just tending the real partnership, which is everybody above there on the list. We had a meeting in November of 2018, and at the meeting, the people said that they wanted to do an RCPP. So one meeting, 1 hour, the group said, we need to get to work on these playas, and we need to get to work on irrigation and saving our community. So that during the course of the next year, I and different people went to these communities monthly, and just informing about playas, informing about programs, pulling a partnership together. And again, for me, it was by far the most rewarding work. It wasn't work at all. It was just fun. And you would walk in the room and people would be, happy to see you. And this is the part where I might tell the story that we did pull an RCPP together. You can see the numbers there, but it's the only meeting in my career working with producers where a couple of them came up to me and said, hey, we wanted to check in with you and make sure that we're doing enough for wildlife and habitat. And I was just blown away because I said, you know, you guys are working on playas, you're working on recharge, you're doing all the right things. We'll track all the wildlife stuff in the background, and you guys are doing great, and you know, just thank you. And so, I mean, that's a message for the NAWMP community. And I was laughing because I realized that I don't have a single picture of a duck in this presentation, but I can tell you exactly what the Leota effort means to our waterfowl objective. I can tell you what the Tribune effort means to our waterfowl objective, and the Clovis objective as well. And I showed all those numbers at the Future Waterfowl talk. But yeah, we're going to meetings where we don't mention wildlife in the whole meeting, and we really don't care because we're getting more than we could ever hope for by walking in the door and say, let's all do shorebird conservation or something like that. They gave the name of the project GRASP. It's the Groundwater Recharge and Sustainability Project. It ended up being a $1.4 million RCPP, which is fairly small, but we want to cookie cutter this among the communities, so not too much effort in this area. And then the partner match was 1.5 million. And again, the most gratifying part of that is the producers were having meetings with like the local hog farms and asking if they wanted to contribute to the project because they use water. They had meetings with the county road departments, and we have one county road department offer $100,000 of heavy equipment work. So yeah, you don't want these people running around in a playa removing sediment without some careful guidance. But that just blew me away that the county road department offered, you know, $100,000 of heavy equipment work. And then that's the kind of match that we use to build the RCPP. This is just a picture of a playa, really before it's been restored. But the really cool part about this playa, this 22-acre playa, is that's the city of Leota. So that migratory bird safe program, this playa had already been enrolled. So we were doing the work before the community, before we even had the community project. But now when we promote the migratory bird safe, we're able to say that the work that FSA is doing through the migratory bird safe benefits communities. And so, you know, it's kind of chicken and egg and chicken, where it's getting all mixed up. And so we hope that the migratory bird safe also continues to function to benefit these towns. And then the joint ventures planning and implementation is really getting a lot more sophisticated. So, and again, talking to hydrologists, the whole idea, if you look at that graphic on the right there, domestic wells are the black crosses, stock and watering wells are the green ones, and the magenta ones are the municipal type wells. So if you draw an ellipse or a circle around each one of those wells, it will encompass certain playas. So this is a sad story right here, where I'm circling because there's all these playas that are not feeding a well. And then up here, there's a bunch of playas that are not feeding a well. But if you look through here, all these wells that have green and orange next to them, those are playas that are directly feeding wells. So those become the priorities for our project. And we'll work on any playas that are in the town, but when we start talking about the aquifer and benefiting people, these playas are the priority. And the joint venture doesn't really care. We'll take the biggest ones, we'll take the easiest ones, we'll take the cheapest ones. But the contrast and the tension there is, you know, this one is meaningful to society, and this one will be easy, and this is one that we should work on. Here's a great example right here. This is a playa right next to a well. I haven't seen that one, but it'll be interesting to look at that one in the future. So again, very standard approach. We have 1,300 acres needing work, a lot of Playas in that whole scene. Of course, we would prioritize for the bigger ones and the biggest bang for the buck. But then the RCPP is structured to talk to reduce water use, retiring wells, and restoring Playas. And that's a really interesting thing, because if you walk into one of these towns and say, let's work on your water supply and let's turn off some wells, you probably won't be in town very long. And but if you walk in and you say, let's work on Playas, let's look at sustainability, it's weird how bringing people together to talk about something safe triggers the conversation to talk about something that they normally wouldn't talk about. So which wells are drying up the town? Which wells are pumping too much? Which wells do we need to reduce use on? That becomes the conversation. It's also interesting that by having that conversation, people are becoming comfortable with the idea that we need to reduce by 30 to 40%. And that used to be, you know, not no, but hell no, is that going to happen? But faced with the reality and faced with we're doing positive things, people are actually starting to say, I think we can reduce by 30 or 40%. And they're finding out that the early season irrigation and the late season irrigation might even just be wasted water. So really, really good stuff there. And really that idea that Playas and the work we're doing becomes a venue to have those hard conversations. So this kind of looks like a slide of, wow, look at all the money we're piling up. But the point really is that in this kind of work, you open new funding sources that aren't really available to us. And so within NIFWIF, there's a program called Resilient Communities, and it's money that Wells Fargo contributes. So we went for one of those grants. Very, very interesting to watch us compete against municipalities and other cities to make their communities more resilient. But we got that grant, and then that's not non-federal. New Mexico Game and Fish is in this in a big way, and that's a lot of that is a Pittman-Robertson grant, and then NRCS, and then we had a small knock, it had to be returned. But the point is that I don't think we would have found wildlife money to turn this crank, and it probably would have been wildlife money matched with wildlife money, and it wouldn't have gone as well. So we found non-wildlife money that wasn't federal, and that made a lot of things happen. And the same thing there again with the Climate Adaptation Fund. Within the Wildlife Society Conservation Grant, there's, I think, only one grant a year that they give that is more towards community and benefiting people, because most of the other money is for wildlife. So that we got one of those, and then the Regional Conservation Partnership, which there's like $3 million involved there. And then we got really nice help from NRCS with a conservation, cooperative conservation grant. And that supports our staff, and it also supports the outreach to the next group of communities, which is also the purpose of the Wildlife Society grant. The really, really fun part, and the really maybe even scary part for folks out there that think PLJV is crazy and has abandoned the waterfowl objective and all that kind of stuff, is that with that money, we're actually getting ready to hire irrigators. And with irrigators, we think that we can short circuit the conversation between what's going on a farm with what's going on with irrigation and Playas. So we know nothing about irrigation, and I don't even think we can educate ourselves about the realities of irrigation. So the NRCS really wants to keep these people on board. They want to keep them involved. So they gave us money to keep the irrigators involved, but then we trained them on Playas. And so the conversation is, well, here's what we're going to do with your well, and here's how we're going to reduce, and here's how we're going to manage that. But then have you thought about working on the Playa? and we have an RCPP, and we can help you restore that and buffers and all that kind of stuff. So the kind of the mantra there down at the bottom is we really feel we're somewhere between not having the capacity to hit all the towns and almost working ourselves out of a job, because our mission is becoming integrated into the economy. And so it's not playas over here and irrigation over here. It's more like, let's increase recharge to the aquifer, let's reduce use of center pivots, and let's make these communities sustainable. So this is going back to the mayor, where you know, when you find relevance, you know when you're succeeding, when they call you, they offer funds, they offer their time, and for them to go back to DC and go to the Fish and Wildlife Service office and say, you know, thank you for your joint venture. That's great stuff. And then you and us and the wildlife community, it just feels a lot different. You're not just pulling and tugging, you're kind of just pushing, and you're just there and you're in support, and you're their ambassador, just like they're your ambassador. And so it's really, really fun to talk about similarities rather than differences. It's really fun to be in the room with different people. And the debate is more about how to get things done rather than what. And so in short, everything just becomes a lot easier because everybody's rowing in the same direction. And I'll repeat here that this is where it's the joint venture's job to make conservation happen, but then track that against our waterfowl objective, our shorebird objective, and make sure that we're actually doing the work that we should be doing. So how does this story end? This is where I honestly feel, we started talking like this 10 years ago, where, you know, too bad our children aren't going to work at PLJV because they'll see all this stuff going on by itself. And now we're having these conversations. We're not giving up, we're not quitting, but it's a lot easier. And, you know, we kind of sometimes have the conversation that we might be working ourselves out of a job. And so these are the things that people are repeating back to us. We don't have to tell them about recharge. They know the amount of recharge. They know it's not going to save center pivot irrigations. They know there's programs out there, and it's all just one part of a bigger package. So this whole thing, like I said, it was developed very organically. The last little piece of social science that we used was just to brand this work. And we did that through surveys in 3 states, offering up a bunch of different ideas. And the brand for this whole initiative is called Tomorrow's Water. And it's connecting people, Playas, and the Ogallala across generations, and that's the tagline. So you'll start seeing that a lot more out there. But I think it's nice that the joint venture did this kind of social science work to say, you know, what works for you, what resonates, and what could you get on board with as far as a brand. So, you know, we hope it sweeps the plains, and we hope we got it right. So it's interesting, this is nearly the last slide here, but it's really interesting that we're seeing this, you know, in all the initiatives out there. You might have heard of the Source Water Protection Initiative under NRCS. Mostly it came from Congress, where 10% of EQIP funds must be devoted to ground or surface water. And it focuses on wellhead protection areas for groundwater protection. This is going on in all the states. So anybody involved in wetlands and water, this is important to you. And so what they're doing is they're prioritizing HUCs by the threat to the wellhead and the groundwater. So contaminants, loss of water, loss of aquifer. And those HUCs there for Texas are the ones that are a priority. And all PLJV is doing is providing maps, very much like Leota in Texas, saying, here's where you have a lot of playas in those HUCs, and they should be a part of the program. So we'll see where that goes, and that could be huge And it would be a great way to export all this to a lot more areas really quickly and maybe more efficiently. So with that, I didn't really talk much about relevance, but I hope everybody got the idea. But relevance is when you start working on other people's problems and then they start caring about you. And even though people will say we probably spend too much of our time convincing people of what is important to us should be important to them, you know, it doesn't matter as long as you get to the same endpoint of a lot more wetlands and a lot more wetlands in good condition and people actually all pulling in the same direction. So with that, I'll stop, and I think we're going to do some questions, but it's really fun to talk to you guys, and I really appreciate people participating. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we do have a couple questions. So this is Dana Varner. I am the science coordinator at Rainwater Basin Joint Venture. We're Mike's neighbor here over in Nebraska. So I'll go ahead and help out by fielding the questions for you. So first to start, why so few green dots in the Rainwater Basin of Nebraska? So this is pertaining to your slide earlier on that had that showed all where the migratory bird safe projects are. Many in Western Kansas, not so many in Nebraska. What's up with that?
It's a great question. I'm really glad that someone asked that question. If you looked, that the priority areas in Kansas were oriented north to south, and they were in the far west. So the way the program was structured, that the upper bound was below the irrigated rate for those priority areas to the eastern part of Nebraska, where the priority areas were organized east to west. So a producer in western Nebraska, if you have a $200 limit, that program is attractive to them. But in central Nebraska, where irrigated ag is at $450 an acre, they won't even look at it. So that is how we, and Andy, the coordinator, restructured the program so that the bids are considered within each priority area. That's less of a deal for Kansas, but it's a huge deal for Nebraska. So we're hoping on the second one that we'll see a lot more enrollment in the actual basins. And I hope I got that right to Andy Bishop and Dana.
Yeah, you pretty much got it. So another question, has the joint venture invested efforts into inclusive workshops and other communiques to engage all society representative of the JV region, especially perhaps underrepresented Latinos?
That's a great question also, and right back at Clovis, we're doing things that the first people who lose the water are those communities that you talk about. So we haven't done specific workshops, but we do translate our materials to Spanish, and then we're very, very conscious of those things that are going on out there. Clovis is the best example because I believe that community is 44% Hispanic. And so, again, I think we are doing that work, and then we are paying attention to it by translating and making sure that things are available in Spanish.
Okay, so a question from me that I have. So when you first started with your way back with the landowner surveys, did you kind of expect that recharge, groundwater recharge would be the most important thing? Did you kind of expect things to go this way?
It's interesting that people will be astounded that in the early days of the joint venture, and I'm talking the 1990s, they actually promoted that Playas didn't recharge the aquifer. And either it was because we don't want to get involved in that, or new science was coming out. So we got that result at the same time that new science was coming out that was saying Playas do recharge the aquifer. And so there was a big debate of whether the joint venture should jump on that bandwagon or not. It was not a simple, yes, let's do this. It was kind of scary. And so we did not expect it. And it took a lot of work to really say let's go ahead with that. But the idea that people were saying that the Ogallala was the most important thing to them was definitely a deciding factor in pushing us that way.
Okay, and one last question, unless another one pops up. So in terms of that 2006 survey, have you ever thought about doing a follow-up, maybe 20-year follow-up or something, to see if attitudes have changed as the water situation has maybe gotten more dire or effects of climate change become more apparent?
I think it might even be, it might sound silly to say that we haven't, but, and I don't think we have, but I also think that our thinking and what we need to do has become a little bit more sophisticated than a broad survey. We're starting to segment our audiences, and we're realizing how different they are. And so I would be interested in, you know, state by state surveys, surveys of people that are on a drying aquifer, surveys for people that have a lot of water. And so a broad survey, maybe not so much, but those segmented audiences would be very, very interesting to us.
Okay, great. So, okay, I don't see any more questions. So just to wrap up then, I want to remind everybody that the recording of this will be available on the NAWMP.org website, so you can share with you know, your partnerships or anyone you think might be interested. And this is just the first of many webinars, we hope. We have the next two planned on the schedule there. You can pop those on your calendar for November 18th, Dave Howarder and Nigel Sims with DU Canada, and then December 10th, Joy Morris and Laurel Anders with Intermountain West. You can register for these on the NAWMP.org website again, and we hope to continue planning these monthly through the winter at least. So we hope you'll join us for the future ones, and thanks so much for connecting. And again, you can share this with anyone you like. Anyone is welcome to watch and attend. Thank you.